Everybody deserves love, but nobody is entitled to it. Katarina Clemmer. Bending, Not Breaking. Season 5, Episode 6. The Sting. And welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine.
And I'm Ben.
And we had a lovely time the last episode.
Oh, it was
Cameron's a joy.
It was a real yay.
It was a real yay. I'm fine with us continuing to do that. Or
No,
we
we
can
have a
continue
new
to work
one.
on. We have a new one. Should we do one in honor of Cameron?
We'll get to that when it comes.
Okay, we'll do that later. Great. But thank you all so much for listening, and we're excited to talk about today's episode, The Sting, and we'll get into the lens. Before we do all that stuff, make sure you're following us on all the social medias, BNB_pod. That's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all the fun things. And then make sure that if you enjoy this podcast, do us a huge favor if you can, and follow it, share it, write a review.
We are not entitled to your doing that.
No.
But we certainly would love it if you did.
That would be awesome if you did. We're super grateful. We're also incredibly grateful for our patrons. Your support is one of the reasons that we're able to continue to do this podcast.
I think it's the reason we've continued to do this podcast.
That's something that's
it has been a factor.
Hugely thankful and gracious to all of y'all who've been supporting us on that. And you can find us on Patreon as well. Just search for Bending Not Breaking. Let's talk some Legend of Korra.
Episode 6.
Episode 6, The Sting.
Yeah.
Wow. Weirdly enough, it's not one of my favorite episodes in this season.
It's not my least favorite episode either.
That might be fair. So we'll get into it, but we're looking through this specific episode through the lens of entitlement.
That sounds right.
Yep. What is it?
What is it?
What are the things?
Yeah. So for me, when I'm considering entitlement, I'm thinking about there's kind of two sides to the coin of entitlement, right? One is when you have a right to do or have or be something, and that means you're entitled to it. So you have the right to do so. Permission in a way.
So not necessarily based off of a self-view of more importance that might dictate some entitlement, but with this specific one, it is you have the right to do that, right?
Yep.
Like you are, ideally we would love to say we are entitled to food and shelter and the ability to survive.
Right. So when you are working a job and you have signed a contract for what you will work, you are entitled to that pay if you worked those hours.
Right.
Right? That is a contractual agreement, and you are entitled to what you agreed upon.
Makes me think of also all the commercials that are like, did you get in a whiplash in a car accident? You could be entitled to...
Exactly, right? It's like, because it's what did people agree upon ahead of time. And
whether that's social contract
right?
norms or
Exactly.
agreed upon contracts and norms.
Yeah. And so that's one sense. And then the other sense is this like, oh, they're so entitled, right? And that's when people feel... they have a right to that thing, right? The right to do or have or be something without having to work for it, or with because they just deserve it inherently, just because of who they are.
One of the things that I'm going to be interested to talk about through this episode is what dictates entitlement, right? Because, or maybe a better way to word that is who dictates entitlement.
Indeed.
Because one of the things that I noticed when trying to do research, because on what causes entitlement, there were a lot of articles that popped up written by people in positions of power, written about specifically the younger generation.
Oh, they're so entitled.
Exactly. And so part of it is, are there people who believe that they're entitled to better service, being treated differently? 100%.
And then saying, oh, they're so entitled is a form of not wanting to adapt to these things
very
that
reasonable
need to
demands,
change.
right? So because in the way that I see that, because even based through this articles are people who are looking for promotions even though they're not ready for one. Does that happen? Absolutely. Are you telling people that so you don't have to pay them more?
Also,
are you gaslighting
happening?
them? Also,
Yes.
that is also happening, right? So, who gets to dictate the entitlement will be an interesting thing to kind of navigate, and one that when we're looking at like, am I being entitled right now? Because
And
because the
rightfully so.
the answer might be yes.
Or do I need to check?
Or am I being gaslit?
Or do I
right
need
now?
to check my privilege?
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. Right. We're going to talk about some of those things, and we're going to see a lot of it specifically in regards to kind of male entitlement throughout this episode.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I was looking at the definition earlier, and the example they provide is about male entitlement.
Well, because we get a lot of examples of male entitlement throughout
We
this episode.
sure do.
And what that means
Throughout this whole
and
world.
So one of the things that I kind of pulled up was just kind of a general like WebMD that has resources kind of locked onto it, but they kind of listed a cycle of entitlement.
Oh, okay. On WebMD. Interesting.
Which is linked to legitimate articles or like legitimate resources, including the Mayo Clinic and other.
All right, let's hear about this this
resources.
Cycle of entitlement.
What they kind of listed, and this is very kind of boiled down to the simplicity aspect of it, is when you're entitled, you're always vulnerable to the threat of unmet expectations.
Ooh, say that again.
When you're entitled, you're always vulnerable to the threat of unmet expectations. Right? So if you feel like the world is owed to you, when you are not given the world,
you're going to be mad
about it. You're going to be mad about it.
All right.
Which is the next step. When your expectations aren't met, it can lead to being dissatisfied and other emotions, anger, a sense of being cheated, a sense of being wronged, is kind of the next aspect of that. So if you're not checking your privilege through your expectations,
interesting,
it's going to lead to more anger, more resentment, more feeling cheated.
Well, I'm also hearing if I am entitled to, certain rights, let's say, and those rights are not being
then
given,
I am going to be angry.
Then I'm going to be angry as well.
And feel cheated.
And frustrated.
And so that's where this balance of, am I truly being cheated?
Yeah.
Or am I feeling this way based off unreasonable expectations is going to be a question I think we're going to have to navigate several times throughout this episode.
Well, and what's the difference between unreasonable expectations and, are those unreasonable expectations ethical in the first place?
Correct. It's
right?
Which is a whole different thing.
Yeah. Right?
Yikes. And then finally, you're distressed. You try to fix the situation and console yourself, typically doing that in self-reassurance that you did deserve everything that you wanted, and reinforcing that entitlement behavior as a way to cope with the anger and the feeling of being cheated. So a lot of people reinforce it by saying, I feel cheated. I want to feel valid in that feeling. And so for me to do that means, no, I did deserve those things.
Well, it's because it's easier to be angry than it is to be,
to push back on your...
let yourself feel guilt, right?
Exactly. And so that is the cycle of entitlement. Yikes. I want something. I don't get it. It is not my fault that I didn't get it. I deserve to get it, right?
Yeah. Ooh.
And like you said, again, what's the balance? What is the balance between how do we check ourselves, because there is the ability to be gaslit by the people around us, into saying you're entitled right now, versus am I truly being entitled, or no, you're not paying me a living wage. I feel like
exactly right. Well, it's also this is really reminding me of the whole what was rooted in civil rights movement, especially around Martin Luther King's era of. His whole argument was around human dignity. And no, we need to cultivate this idea that we deserve this, we deserve treatment that is not treating us as though we are less than human. Mm-hmm. You need to treat us as though we are fully human. And that was his argument a lot, and framing it of we are all blessed and by the indelible stamp of our Creator. And for him, that was this Christian God that is marking everyone as deserving of human rights. Mm-hmm. And what that was led to is really combating against people that were calling, black people in that era entitled, and that's problematic rhetoric.
Well, we're seeing
right?
it right now,
and
right?
we see it
We see
now.
it right. Anytime
Yeah.
someone's fighting for livable wages, we see, I'm not giving you free money. I'm
Yeah.
not giving you. I'm not paying you that much just so you can sit on your rear.
Unskilled labor.
Right.
Right.
And so we're seeing language get thrown around by that. But are there people who are entitled, expecting specific behaviors because of where they live, their social status, whether they know it, their race, whether they acknowledge it, their gender or perceived gender, right? These things that you feel owed to.
Yeah.
Because I live in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
I can come up to you and tell you can't be here, or you can't do this thing,
Yeah.
or you can't have a yard sale because I live here, right? And so figuring out the balance of what that looks like. And I think early on, and this is my theory is the power of who is calling someone entitled plays into that, right?
Yeah.
So if, for instance, I'm going to use the language punching up and punching down. There's probably better language, but like if someone is punching up, if someone is lifting it up to you that you have power over, there might be some truth to that, right?
Yeah.
If someone who has the power to be supportive and the power over you is calling you entitled, I would say my theory is typically it's they get to control the situation and they're trying to control the narrative in most moments. But it also is who are we willing to take feedback from in those moments is also important, right?
Yeah. Well, let's learn more. Let's figure it out. Let's use this episode as a way to dive into this a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and before we do that, Ben, you've got 30 seconds.
Pretty sure it's even, which means it's your turn.
Goodness. We made a whole deal about it, of me doing it. Cameron even said it was my turn last time. I totally did it last time. It is your turn on the clock. Ready, go.
But Cameron, so bombs and stuff, Unalak traipses out in the spirit world, and, Eska's like, the Avatar is dead, and they're like, oh, no. And then Balloon's first mover is out, and he hits on Ginger, and then Asami is sad, and then Mako plays detective, and then proposes, like, this
15
sting,
seconds.
and then Asami guilt trips Mako, Bolin's luxurious life, and then Bolin helps Mako, but Mako's like, what about the sting scam? Varric, 3 steps ahead, chess. Bolin kisses Ginger when she is tied down. Can we just pause there? That's really not good. And then Mako has a revelation about remotes.
Mako does have a revelation about remotes.
I missed some things, but let's be real.
30 seconds.
I
is
hit
tough.
the big things.
Yeah, remotes and things.
Yeah.
He knows.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I didn't miss. Korra has amnesia. That's what she wakes up with amnesia.
She does have amnesia.
That's not good.
She's not in this episode at all.
She is. She's
until the very end.
Yes. Yeah, Yeah.
Who?
Yeah.
Entitlement
Entitlement in this episode.
Let's go.
Let's go.
What you got?
What do you have?
So one of the things early on is Mako's entitlement to move around procedure without fear of repercussion or without fear of...
Interesting. What's an example of that?
Or maybe acknowledging, jumping into the interrogation room when he wants to be able to kind of pitch his theory.
So he's like, I have an idea.
And he's like, and I'm going to go ask this guy about these questions. And, it takes a little bit of an entitlement of, I deserve to be in that space.
Yeah.
Wow. The balance, and I would argue typically dictated by who's in power, of there is power to say, I deserve to be in this space. I deserve to have a seat at the table.
Absolutely.
And lifting that up. And for other people to say, these people deserve to have a seat at the table. I don't know if Mako deserved to have a seat at the table in that room. But he felt like
it's complicated because we know with hindsight and future sight that he's right.
Sure.
Right? And when we know Mako is right, it's one of those things where it makes these situations more complicated because why is the system in this situation making it so that someone with a good idea can't speak up?
Sure.
Right? And I think that's a question that's worth asking. I don't know, because this is not a situation where this was an interrogation of a criminal either, right? This is someone who is willingly cooperating and volunteering information,
right.
And I like he's able to watch, but he can't participate. So like, where is the sense of entitlement? And I'm curious, is it specifically? Are you talking about it from a respect lens of my superiors are in the room and it feels entitled because I'm walking in on my superiors having this meeting? Or is it a sense of you weren't invited into the room in the first place?
So but he felt like he needed to be in there.
Yeah.
And and I think if we're relating this back to us, all of these questions are important.
Yeah.
And because here's where the eye roll moment is, where I'm going to say something and people are going to be like, why does everything have to be about this?
Sunshine always says this.
Would he have done that to a male police chief?
Do you always say that? I'm not rolling my eyes.
No, but I think, and I don't know if many of our listeners are, but how often, why do you have to make things about gender? Well, because sometimes they are.
Sometimes they are.
And let's assume the very best in Mako.
Yeah.
And let's assume that he is not prejudiced against women in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
It's still important for him to ask the question of, would I have done that to a male police chief?
Sure.
Because the answer might be, yeah, no, I feel confident and that this is the right move, and so I'm going to do it. And I think that sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's the move. Sometimes the move is I'm going to act outside of the system. I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not asking yourself that question ever, or if you get angry when you heard me lift up that question, you got to ask yourself why.
Well, and the problem is, again, our brains trick us and make us think that we're acting a certain way for a certain reason, when really we've been conditioned over time to act a certain way, and we think we're acting on our own and without being influenced by other people, but that's not possible.
I mean, when you look at why, again, going back to the Mayo Clinic article that was posted by WebMD, and where does entitlement come from? They kind of give the blanket it's your environment, it's the way your parents treated you, it's whether adults solved problems for you, it's how you were treated by authority figures. All those things play into it, which doesn't really give us these are the 10 steps that make you entitled.
Yeah.
But all of those things are important. Again, asking yourself those questions, asking questions along the lines of, am I treating other people the way that I would like to be treated in this situation? Which is a kindergarten question.
Yeah.
But that question alone is one to say, am I engaging in this space the way that I would want people to engage if I was the police chief in this situation?
But also, I think, again, it's the, platinum rule, golden rule deal, where I think it's what is the way that they would want to be treated in this situation matters just as much as what is the way that I would want to be treated.
Yeah, and when we're teaching it to young ones, how do you want to feel is sometimes how we go, that's likely how others would feel. Not always, but
And I think it's worth the semantic change, though, just to articulate that the way that you would want to resolve the situation is not necessarily the best way to resolve a situation, right?
Correct.
Just by assuming that treating them the way you would want to be treated does not mean you're doing it right.
Correct.
Right? And that can be a form of entitlement, right? I'm allowed to act this way because this is the way that I would want somebody to act with me.
Mm-hmm.
And excuse me? No, you need to change.
In this scene, so we know that we can assume that Mako is doing this out of morality, out of really believing that this is the right move.
He believes
that this is going to protect the city and the people in the city.
Exactly.
Countered with the way that Varric shows up.
He just walks in the room
who's
too.
A civilian.
Yep.
Who, even if the best assumption
to be fair,
I have of Varric,
so does Asami.
Right. Behind Mako, right?
Yes.
And so is there a bit of entitlement that comes with money, that comes with I paid for these things,
both in Asami's and Varric's situation,
or the comment, you work for me, right? It was such a teacher response, as a teacher you work for me, the taxpayer, so that means I'm entitled to your time and planning, and those things aren't true.
Yeah.
But Varric shows up. What is the best assumption for Varric in the way that best case I think is I'm being helpful, so I also deserve to be in this space because I'm here to help.
Yeah, but my first draft is he knows that he's the one who did this, and he wants to be in on the situation,
and he knows he has connections with President Raiko.
Yeah, well, yeah,
and so
he's leveraging all of his privilege.
And so when
in
you
this
don't
moment.
have fear of consequence, does that affect
your sense of entitlement, right?
Exactly.
Like, or are you more willing to step on other people's entitlement in order to claim more for yourself?
And both you and I have been in situations like that, even in work before, where we've said we can kind of do these things because we know the worst thing that's going to happen to us is a slap on the wrist.
Yes.
Like, we've made those conscious decisions.
I have done that.
And arguably, I think we've done those things in our minds for the betterment of the communities that we're serving or the staff that we're serving.
And so I think an example of that, just to put that language with an example, is the organization I used to work with. I would intentionally, before it was, allowed, I would put my pronouns in my email signature. And that was
against branding.
That was against brand standards, was the line that we were given. And so I had to have a conversation and be like, help me understand why this isn't allowed, right? And the fact is, I was willing to go into that conversation because my dignity, human worth, identity was not on the line.
Correct.
And I was not worried that I was going to get fired because of this. Mm-mm. And I was not worried that people would treat me differently because of this. But it was one of those things where I felt that was important to do. And so I advocated for it. I did it. And I forced them to give me a reason why. And then that's how that worked.
But yeah.
That's an example.
Yeah.
Right?
But you knew that was against brand standards to kind of begin with, or that you knew that you'd be flagged for it.
I did. And I was.
And you were?
Quickly.
Yeah. And so, but those are moments where, again, is that entitlement? And I think it is. Like, that was a privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference between privilege and entitlement? Where are things like...
Well, and it wasn't those... I think it was not a... To be clear, it wasn't I feel entitled to do this, so I'm going to. Right. It was like, no, I need to do this because I can, and other people in this situation can't without feeling
so context is important,
unsafe, right? And so to me, I wouldn't say that I was like, this is an act of entitlement. It was an act that feels different. I would say that the story that someone who had to hold me accountable there might have been that I was entitled, right? But to me, it did not feel like a move that was coming from my entitlement. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder...
Someone could have perceived it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So I wonder how much perception is involved here and what that looks like.
When how much is it a valid conversation to ask people that we trust to give feedback on those moments? And to say... Hey, I really want to know, do you think I was acting outside of my values? Do you think I was entitled in this moment? And to listen to those that are there to provide feedback to us.
Yeah.
That we trust. And that also means not asking random people in your organization because you think they might be able to tell you if you're entitled and kind of give you validation. But it means people who have also engaged in a relationship with you enough that are willing to give you that feedback.
Yeah.
But that's, does Mako have the ability to talk to someone after that? Does he trust Lynn enough? Does he have a Tenzin around?
Can he come back and say, hey, I realize this is what happened. You yelled at me, and I've been thinking about it.
It's probably tough to do that when you try to do your own sting operation outside of your...
Probably not helpful.
So it probably doesn't speak well.
Doesn't seem like he has an opportunity to do that.
And so that goes to another moment for Mako, which is... I'm going to go set up the sting operation and go work with a local gang to
so not only is he working with criminals,
doubles down on
right? He doubles down. He was like, no, this is so important that I need to go around procedure again. Mm-hmm. And again, is he right? Sure. But is he going about it perhaps not a great way? It seems to suggest that is the case. Like, this text as Avatar is telling us that even though you may be right, sometimes acting with entitlement will take you down the wrong path, right? Even when you have the best intentions, acting with an entitled, sense will not turn out well, it seems.
Yeah, and Asami's right there with him, right, this entire time. Like, she's willing to do this. She's willing to jump in on this.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, she really kind of guilts Mako into doing it.
yeah.
Like, I don't know that he would have, like, he's like, oh, I have an idea, but I probably won't ever do it. And she's like, no, we're doing it. And you should do it because I'll lose everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll be ruined. And then she's like, I'm ruined. Like, that's what, like, I lost everything.
Well, so let's, this is going to be an interesting, she owns this organization, this business
Future
venture,
Industries.
Future Industries. She was gifted all of this to her dad, from her dad, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Who we know
Inherited after he no longer had,
But he made, like, he got all of these things through ethical and non-ethical actions, right? Like, these things that this company now has were obtained.
I'm not sure that we're
assume unethically,
like I mean,
based off of what he was doing with all of this machinery, based off of like the war profiteering that's taking place.
Well, I think what we can like say, even like war profiteering aside, like we know that he was using funds to fund the equalist movement. Right? In terms of how he got that money and what he, what did he say he was going to do? Like, was it ethical to, like, legally, so to speak, to do that? That's, who knows? Like,
so one, is she entitled to the things that exist, or like in that? Legally, they would say yes, right? Those are her things.
Yes.
Because then we get to thievery, which is in the act of theft.
Yes.
Entitlement.
That makes sense.
Right? Like, is that entitlement?
Well, sometimes people steal things when they know they're not entitled to it. They just don't think the person they're stealing from is entitled to it either.
Right.
Right? Katara, waterbending scroll.
It wasn't hers.
Yeah, but it wasn't theirs.
But she knew it wasn't the pirates either.
Exactly.
Well, and then she did feel some. It's the water tribes.
Yes. There was, that was that story that she told.
I am entitled to it.
Mm-hmm. That kind of follows that story you were talking about with the cycle from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But that's an interesting example.
Which again, to kind of reiterate that, it's the sense of when you're entitled, you're vulnerable to the threat of unmet expectations. You shouldn't have that.
Yep.
My expectations is that you don't have a waterbending scroll from the water tribe because you're not from the water tribe.
From my people.
She takes it because anger.
Yep.
Feeling like, in other aspects of her life, and shame kind of.
Yes. Exacerbated
that. And then she reassures herself over time that that's still hers.
No.
Like,
well, and
she's right.
it's also like, yeah, no, this is the water. Like, I needed to take this. Right? Mm-hmm. It's rightfully mine. Like, it's the story you tell to talk yourself into why it was the right decision.
And so I wonder how much plays into this act of entitlement. Is that a coping sense for not feeling enough? Right? Feeling scarcity.
I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Because in some ways I think it is. Am I not good enough if I don't get the all-star treatment when I walk into a Starbucks? Am I not worthy of that? Am I not good enough for those things? Like, do we start to act as though we are as a way to cope with not feeling like we're enough?
That made me, like, the thing that came to my head there was that feels very Karen to me.
Yes.
Like, right, and being entitled when you walk into a Starbucks to get the royal treatment, that feels very, like, Karen as an archetype.
Well, but I'm a regular here. All these people aren't regulars. I show up here every single day, so I should be treated.
I work in a restaurant. I see that all the time. Like,
every time I go to your restaurant, I get treated very kindly, right?
Yeah.
The staff knows me, but at the same time, every time I go in, oh, we're sorry that your table's not ready yet. Cool. No, like, anyone else would have to wait in this moment, right?
Yeah.
So I'm fine with that. Take your time. Do your thing.
Yep.
Like, I'm not expecting anything in those moments except to order the food that I want to eat and have it be edible, right? Like, that's the service I'm paying for.
Edible.
But
the
you
goal.
happen to treat me kind because we know each other, and you treat everyone kindly, I would hope.
Yeah.
And so, is there a little bit of, when we don't feel like we're enough, we take that out on the world, especially where we think we can?
It's also...
What's the repercussion for me yelling at a 16-year-old who's serving me coffee?
Yeah. I think another thing that's coming to my mind when on this sense of entitlement that is like undeserved, unwarranted entitlement is this idea. I totally just blanked. Wow. Oh man.
We've all been there. Entitlement, coffee, word association, celebrity status.
I like
Shame.
so blanked.
It'll come back to you.
I really blanked.
And all this actually kind of plays into the celebrity status of Bolin as nARK, right?
Yeah, I was still trying to remember, but yes, like for sure, nARK is.
We start to see this,
and his whole demeanor changes once he gets money, like right, he like starts treating Mako pretty poorly. Granted, like Bolin's right. Mako did tell Bolin no, right, and so Bolin is like. Once he has this privilege of all this money, he's like, now I'm in a position of power to say no to you.
Right.
And, it's interesting to think about like family relationships and how when we are suddenly blessed with things that we did not have before, how that changes how we act and interact with the people we care most about.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And does this money or luxury in one area change our expectation of how people will treat me in another?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the answer, as we see, is yes. Our sense of entitlement shifts when parts of our lives receive certain benefits, but other parts don't shift with it.
And that's reinforced by the societal norms that we're living into, right? If I have money and I get to pay for certain seats for a certain sporting event, their free food is there. Ushers are there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm treated by these people who are hoping for tips because I may have more money, like when you walk into those places. And so do we sit there and expect the same treatment from other people in our in other facets of life because we felt that feeling?
Yeah.
Say we collectively. I've been lucky enough and privileged enough to kind of have those moments in life, but it's just one of those things that it greatly shifts.
Yeah.
If you're experiencing that 50% of the time, overall, my theory is that you're going to start expecting that 100% of the time.
I remembered what I was going to say. The difference between taking things for granted
mm-hmm.
and entitlement, right? Those two are very closely intertwined.
Right.
It feels like,
sure,
right? So when you are entitled and taking those things that you were entitled to for granted, what happens is it creates a lack of gratitude and a lack of humility around those things. And I wonder if the shift away from entitlement is, how do I cultivate gratitude around these things that I do have?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that is a remedy, so to speak, to this negative sense of entitlement that we've been flirting with.
Yeah.
Because the other side of entitlement, we also want to cultivate and foster. Like, I want people to feel entitled to a living wage. That is the way we get a living wage, is people start voting for it, right? And in order to vote for it, you need to feel entitled to it, right? And it's we also need the capacity to vote. That's a problem. But it's
feeling entitled that you deserve to vote.
That
right?
you deserve to vote, period. Yes.
That's easy for me
right?
to say on my end, where I've never had voting as an issue for me.
Precisely. Yeah. Right? So capitalism broken, democracy broken, lots of broken. But in general, I think I'm leaning towards gratitude being a potential remedy.
Gratitude and humility.
Yeah.
Because if we are, I guess that's one way to keep us in check.
Well, and does that gratitude...
Are we constantly being grateful?
Yeah.
Are we constantly recognizing that, like, we are not the center of the universe?
Yeah. And does practicing that gratitude, is that what brings the humility? Is that what cultivates the humility, right? Because I think the art of practicing gratitude is something that broadens and builds our capacity for humility.
And we've always talked about leadership and life as being complex and having paradoxes that list, because we want to be humble enough to know that we're not the center of the universe.
Yep.
We want to be proud enough to stand up and say, nope, this is a boundary.
Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely. Well, and
I deserve this.
False modesty is unbecoming of a leader also. Like, just being like, I'm actually not very good at this. When you have that skill, you are holding back from the capacity that you have to give to whatever that project may be, right? And so an accurate sense of what we can do and what we need in order to do it is really important for the success of anything that we're buying into.
Let's talk Bolin, because we talked a little bit about his celebrity status.
Yeah, this is
but
this is pretty bad.
It's a moment, and it's not the first time that
it's been getting worse and worse the whole time.
When this also isn't the first time that the Avatar universe has lifted up sexual assault as as a joke, and so I think that's what frustrates me even more. And again, you can roll your eyes and think I'm making too much of it. I don't think I am. Kissing someone without their consent,
in particular,
is assault.
When they are literally tied down.
Is assault.
It is.
It is sexual assault, and we see Varric.
Varric freaks out, but he initially
that's not in the script.
That's not in the script, and then he's like, oh, but I was just I was acting, and he's like, you think that someone, when she is tied down and trying to fearing for her life, that now is an appropriate time to kiss her, and then he shifts and he's like, that could work, and it's just like he's initially on the right track there
and reinforcing it.
But then, and again, I think what happens is, we talked a lot about this performance aspect from him last time. He's like, oh wait, if we perform this, what we can do, and here's all the ways that I can benefit. And I legit think that's what's going through his head in this moment. He's like, wait a second, if we go this direction, this movie will do X, Y, and Z, and it will, and I think letting us make decisions like that because it sells tickets changes culture. So making movies that perpetuate cultural stigma is, I would argue, almost as bad as doing the act yourself.
No.
That's an interesting little claim. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because I think that when we make movies and we make cultural phenomena in media that are perpetuating stigma of a certain sort, and it's not critically doing so, then it's going to lead to perpetuation, because people are really not good at discerning. And I'm like, it's hard.
In comparing, there's never going to be a benefit of comparing you're just as bad, or because the reality is it's bad.
Yeah,
it's causing harm.
Correct.
So whether you think it is just as bad as is
it's beside the point.
Really, but it's causing harm to people.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, because this is a very real thing for male entitlement of, I wanted to kiss her. I felt like it was the right move.
Yeah.
So I just did it.
She should be flattered.
I wanted to, right? And we talk, she should be flattered. Oh, I'm pretty sure she was giving me signs. Or, oh, I just wanted to. And, and we've seen people kind of point to movies before, no, that's what girls want. They want you to take charge and just kiss them, right?
Yeah.
And so
I read about it.
I wanted to. It takes a special place, and special's not it. I'm not using that in a positive light, to sit there and say, I wanted to do this thing, and so I did it. At the expense of the autonomy and the safety of another individual.
And that, my friends, is entitlement.
And so how do you get to that place, and how do we get out of that place?
Again, I think that we are shaped culturally.
For sure.
And I think that when we are in a culture that does not question that, does not have this conversation about those behaviors, and let's be real, the first several times I watched this, that wasn't my question. I was just watching it. It's entertainment. It's one of those things where when we return to this and are asking these questions, oh my goodness, this is dangerous, because no one talks about this. And then when people do talk about it in the fandom, half the people start defending Bolin.
I'm so tired of hearing,
and
it's a joke. It's meant to be a joke.
Yeah.
What it's meant to be is irrelevant. And if you are the only person who's finding that funny, or a certain demographic of people are the ones that are finding it funny, but other people are telling you it is very much not funny,
Yeah.
take note of where you fall on that line and who are the ones that are standing up for it.
Yep. Yep.
But it is a moment. I hate this moment in the show. I hated it when Iroh. Iroh and June.
And I love Bolin, and I love Uncle Iroh.
Right.
But people are people, and the best people in our lives can make really big mistakes.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean they're like it. I don't think that their human dignity is any less than. They are still fully human. They're still fully deserving of love, and they made a big mistake.
Yeah.
And there should be some accountability around that.
And here's the thing, because here's the other thing is, Bolin is a fictional character. I'm not trying to hold Bolin accountable in this moment.
Sure.
Right? I'm not fictional, but I do think it points to us to where we say, how do we keep people, hold people accountable to this and teach people this using the fictional media that we have? Because that's the other argument. It's fiction. It's a joke or it's fiction. Well, cool. You can learn from fiction.
You sure can. I wrote a paper about fictional characters.
It's like we have a whole podcast about it.
Well, I wrote also. But there's this, like, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but parasocial relationships are relationships that you have with people that do not know that you exist. For instance, fictional characters. Or another example is when someone who, like, has a crush on a celebrity. The celebrity has no idea that this person exists, and yet they are in love with the other person. So it's the same with fictional characters. And so our brains don't differentiate between this fictional character being a live human being and from another relationship in our lives. Mm-hmm. And so when this character dies, when they go through grief, when they do X, Y, and Z, we feel that in our bodies just as much as if we had a similar relationship with them literally in reality. Mm-hmm. And so
you're spending quality time with these characters.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Moments that we would point to what make you click with friends and family or real relationships. Those moments happen when you spend 8 hours binging a show.
Yeah.
More time thinking about it. More time talking about it.
Well, and then what happens is you start a podcast about your favorite show, and then your relationships get deeper and deeper because you're spending more and more time with these characters. Right. And even though the constructs of these characters are very much in my head, what makes this a sacred act, and the whole premise behind our podcast, is when we start to have a conversation and the person of Korra is shaped by not just my views, but yours, and every guest that is part of our conversation, and all of the people on Patreon that submit comments and talk to us about our live episodes. Like all of these people in these conversations are shaping our relationship with these characters, right? And that's why it's so important to do this kind of thing in community. Me doing this by myself is not nearly as effective as me getting, I had never considered Korra would do it from that angle. Wow, that's so different. And all of a sudden, it's just more healthy, right? So I wonder if another way to combat this sense of entitlement is to be in relationship with more people and have more conversations about said topic.
Correct.
Right? And so, because that's how we check each other. Those are the checks and balances, are the relationships we have with one another. So I think we can address entitlement in that way by being in community, one, and then two, what we said earlier, cultivating gratitude.
Well, again, it's because part of the things that, the man in the arena, right?
Brene, love it. Really, it's a Teddy Roosevelt eventually, right? But,
Well, and this is where it goes to that feedback piece, because it is who you are getting your feedback from in regards to some of these tough topics of, am I being entitled in this situation? You're going to want to get that from the people that have been in the arena with you, who are also going through life with you, not from people who don't know you or are standing kind of out in the cheap seats. At the same time, if you're in an information silo that is confirming everything that you're experiencing. Nope, that's true. Nope, that's what I feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
If your 5 people you accept feedback from are also the same as you in regards to experiences and identities,
not every community
is
the best community to do this with.
Correct.
Right? So you need to cultivate community with people that you trust, but also people that are intentionally different than you, because otherwise you won't ever be able to get the full story.
But I think what also makes me mad more about this situation too, specifically like Bolin, Ginger has given him plenty of no's.
Said no so many times
throughout, and he still felt entitled to that moment. He still felt entitled to her body. And so the kind of the one of the boundaries that I feel like setting is when someone tells you no, listen.
That
Just
would help.
Listen.
Yeah.
And respect boundaries.
Yes.
Respect people's boundaries.
Yes. Yeah, and your misinterpretation of their body language is not consent.
Nope.
Right?
So,
even if you think you're right, it's not.
Yeah. This moment, we don't have to get to the highs and lows or the
nooks and crannies.
No, but this is my moment for that. I hate it. I hate it that it was written. I hate that it was put in there. I hate it.
Yeah. Are there other moments of entitlement that we want to make sure we touch on before we continue into our next segmenty thingies?
I mean, I think there's we've talked about the sting itself. I mean, do we want to talk about the triads? Is there entitlement in that relationship or in that moment?
I don't know. I feel like
the triads clearly feel entitled to things that aren't theirs.
Well, I mean, they feel entitled to take advantage of Mako, right? Even though like he's like keeping up their end of the deal. So he was planning on continue if they let him, they would have gotten these cars from Asami because he's like, well, now you owe us these cars, and I guarantee you, like, I don't have a very generous assumption of this.
Yeah.
Right. This feels very much like, oh, well, it might be like I'm entitled to rip them off because they've only done harm to me my whole existence, right? I'm entitled to this because Future Industries is the machine and we're going to rage against it. And like, there's so many entitlement stories they could be telling.
Right.
And we just don't know what they are. And we don't know if like, are they, I just don't have generous assumptions either. And I don't think we're meant to, but.
Well, I think the final step is Varric, right? So Varric is now purchasing Future Industries at this moment under the guise of, look at me supporting the little guy.
Yeah.
But we have good feeling at this point that he has set all of this up to be able to just purchase this.
You don't give that smirk to Mako and not be the bad guy. Dude, that was the perfect bad guy smirk.
And so I think he felt entitled to Future Industries.
He's like, I won.
I want it.
Checkmate.
I want it. I'm going to take it.
Yep. Yeah. Dangerous. Check your entitlement.
Yep.
Check your entitlement.
So what are the ways that we check that before we take a break and jump into our all the exercises after this? What are the takeaways from how we keep ourselves in check from entitlement, and how do we balance that with the moments that no, we need to be entitled to this? And
so I'll start with what I remember we've talked about so far in terms of keeping entitlement in check. One, I think the first thing that kind of emerged was cultivating gratitude and how that leads to a sense of humility.
Yep.
Right. And then the second thing is making sure we're using the checks and balances of our relationships and the community that we are in, and intentionally building that community to be reflective of the world rather than just our,
perception,
self-perpetuating bias.
Correct.
And so those are two things I'm remembering that came up.
As always, asking the question itself. Right.
Yeah, awareness in general, right?
And that. I feel like that has been a theme for our entire podcast, and I think you got to ask. You've got to process that. You've got to be able to sit there and say, am I being entitled in this moment? I think if you're willing to ask that question, it's already probably pushing you in the correct direction of wanting to learn and break the cycle of entitlement. Learning from your mistakes. And then, again, as kindergarten, it's kindergarten, and we learn a lot in kindergarten, but the golden rule, the platinum rule, just treating other people the way that you want to be treated, or better yet, the way that they want to be treated.
Yep. Yeah.
While respecting your boundaries and theirs as well.
Yeah. This is reminding me of, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten.
That's right.
I think the world would be a little bit better
I want a nap every day.
if we did that. Yeah.
Give me a nap every day.
Yeah.
But within all this, the same way that we want to act inside our values, when people set boundaries, listen to them.
Yeah. We've probably talked about that on the podcast once or twice.
Yeah.
And so the other half of your question there was, how do we cultivate entitlement when we deserve it and when it is warranted?
Right.
How do we let ourselves claim that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, it's the same questions. It's cultivating gratitude, humility for what we do have. I think it's saying, I think this is a reasonable expectation.
Mm-hmm.
I have, again, checked with my community, and these people have helped me see that this is important.
I've set boundaries, and this is a part of that.
I've set, exactly. And now that I've set this boundary, I'm going to set this boundary saying I'm entitled to this. And when you try to take it from me, I'm going to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
And being willing to do so.
Whether that's your time, whether because when I think of that from a work standpoint, that's one of the biggest ones, right?
So, like how?
Contractually, the hours that you've agreed to work.
Sure. But can't you? I really need you to get this done this weekend.
And I think there's times if you feel like you can balance that, it's okay to say yes sometimes. If a boundary is, I'm setting X amount of time for friends and family,
Mm-hmm.
or for myself,
Mm-hmm.
then respect that boundary.
Yeah.
And so if the reality is, no, Saturday mornings, even though I'm salaried, Saturday mornings are my me time.
Sure.
So I'm not going to answer that email during that time, right?
Yeah. Well, it's also saying, like, notice when you start to feel like you are being taken advantage of. And does that indicate that someone feels that they are entitled to you in a way that they shouldn't be? And that should be like, okay, that means I need to set. That's, for me, is like, oh, it's time for boundaries, right? And so when I feel taken advantage of, when I feel resentful, those are, to me, flags saying, okay, who do I think is entitled in this situation? Why? And what are the boundaries I need to set in order to not feel that way?
Yeah.
Yeehaw.
We fixed it.
Yep, we solved the world.
Solved the world. We'll be right back.
Korra. You helped us do that.
More exercises right after this break.
Woo! And now it's time for our next segment. This week, we will be doing Cheers and Jeers.
Which, a little New Year's cheer.
New Year's cheer.
Holiday cheer.
And when I jeer at people because they're...
That's a word, right? That's a thing that, like, giving jeers, like poking fun of.
But we're not going to do that.
No, but that's like it's more of a negative thing. So that's kind
it's
of
not great. Yeah, I think
lows.
it's to make a rude and mocking remark.
Yeah, that works. Cheers and jeers might actually be like a good overall segment title. That might be. What if that's the permanent one?
I'm still a fan of Nooks and Crannies.
No, I hate it. I hate it.
We're gonna hear from our listeners.
I hate it so much.
Yeah, but
I hate it so much.
Well, good thing this is not a place where we make all the decisions.
No, but we make a lot of them. Like we get to make some of them.
Anyway, maybe after all of the ones we try this whole season, y'all will land on one that will help us.
I don't care if they do it to spite me. We're not calling it.
What if it's 100%?
I don't care. That is one word. That is a boundary I'm setting.
Is that where you want to put your boundary?
That's one of them. I hate it. I hate that title.
All right.
Almost anything. We can pick almost anything else.
Sounds like a jeer to me.
It's always have you ever watched businesses say we're going to let you name our new cruise ship on the internet?
Yeah.
Where trolls are.
Yeah.
It never turns out well.
Yeah, but
it
Our
never
patrons
turns
aren't
out well.
Coles.
No.
Trolls.
No, they're not. But it never turns out well.
I just want y'all to know that Sunshine called you all trolls, but I love you.
Pretty sure that is not what just happened there.
Anyway, for cheers and jeers,
Yeah.
what is your either? Pick one and then tell us.
For my cheer, I think I've already said my cheer, right? The fact that and this happens not just in Korra.
I think that's both of ours. It is hands down.
But it
the
also
worst
happens
moment.
in other shows, right? Like moments of that takes place as jokes throughout sitcoms, from 1970 on, and certainly before then.
Yep.
And so I hate it.
Need less of that.
Need less of it.
Yep.
On the flip side of that, the fact that we're able to have this conversation, the fact that we're able to kind of be able to talk about that, and the show has opened up the possibility for that, is one that I am grateful for. I am grateful for the learnings that we get to pull from these shows. And I think that's in this episode specifically, to look at male entitlement. I think was something that I appreciate that we were able to have that conversation.
And I think it just we get questions every now and then from people who are like, what does it mean to treat something sacredly? Does that mean like you're thinking it's like perfect? And I'm like, no, that is not what that means. And it is a very complicated story. There are complicated characters. All it means is that we think we can learn from it by using this discernment process that we do with this every time we do an episode of this podcast.
Right.
And I think that that's really important, right? Is having a discernment process, right? When we are doing this. And so I'm grateful for the process, right? I'm grateful that we are able to learn from something that is broken so that we can learn how to be less broken in our own world, right? Yeah, so I'm grateful for that too. But I won't pick that. For mine, my cheer, bear with me, is Korra having amnesia. And the reason is we get to the next two episodes are a lot of Avatar lore that I don't know that we would have gotten otherwise, that we learn about the origin of the Avatar. And so I don't love that Korra has amnesia, but I love that it's where it's leading us to learn more about Avatar lore.
What it feels like in that moment too, we see these religious figures,
the Fire Temple sages,
show up and do things that are beneficial, right? That do things to support and help.
Yeah.
And for me, having a scattered past through religion, seeing it used for healing and for purpose is nice, as opposed to attacking or fear-mongering,
as it has been done in Atla with the Fire Sages.
Correct.
Right? When it
was
was corrupted,
very
right?
different Fire Sages.
Yeah.
And so that's cool. I'm excited. I like the next two episodes. I know that
I do too.
I know that the story of Juan is a maybe polarizing. Some people don't love that took place, but I enjoy these next two episodes.
Oh, I do too.
So it'll be interesting to talk about
too.
them. With a special guest that you'll get to hear later.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Another friend of the podcast has been on a couple times, but we love having them.
Absolutely. All right. Now, we've done our cheers and jeers.
Yep.
And now we're moving on to
Devotion.
And this is where we set our intention. And this week, our lens is entitlement, and our element is earth, because that's next in the Avatar cycle, because we did water last week. So with that in mind, when you think of earth, when you think of entitlement, what is a goal that you want to set for this coming week to help you grapple with?
One of the things I think about Earth is the ability to create shelter, the ability to set barriers. And typically, we always hear, we want to break down barriers and things like that. But I think when it comes to boundaries, right, having a sheltered home, having a shelter, having boundaries that help us kind of denote those markings of where we are important. Setting firm boundaries is what I kind of think about as when I think of the Earth aspect of that. I think that there's two things. I want to set boundaries and make sure that I'm holding true to my boundaries to protect me and to protect the things that are important to me. at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm doing that for others. And so making intentional time to understand and to listen and to make sure that I'm not crossing boundaries.
Yeah.
And even if there's moments where I'm like, did I cross a boundary when I did that? Like asking the question.
Yeah.
And allowing people opportunities to share their boundaries, I think is important. If I truly want to do the work to be respectful of other people's boundaries, that's a part of that. And so I think that's an intention for me over the next week.
Well, I think that's so interesting too, because I think about the way you framed that. I had a very visual, like when I see a barrier, I see something visible that is there that indicates to me that like, oh, I can't cross that line. But oftentimes those barriers are invisible because we don't tell people where the boundaries are. Right. And what you're offering other people when you put up a barrier is a visual representation of where the line is, right? And I think that metaphorically, obviously, we have the capacity to make the invisible visible with our boundaries. And I wonder what would be different about the way we engage with the world if our boundaries are a little bit more visible and explicit rather than explicit and I just expected you to know that you couldn't do this.
Right.
You know?
That being said, for us too, when people aren't able to be explicit with their boundaries, we need to set the boundaries.
We need to not assume.
Correct.
Right? It goes both ways.
One of I feel like there's a lot of eye roll moments, not because I think they're deservingly of eye rolls, but because culturally they do. Because I've had conversations with people where I say, I very much dislike when physical touch is assumed in families.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Hugs, high fives. I like a high five because, like, by putting up your hand, you are allowing someone
it's an
invitation to high five. But specifically, even around the holidays, this like hug your uncle.
No, thank you.
I'm your grandparent. You have to hug me. Or I'm your cousin. You have to hug me. Like, no, right? So, in those moments, a 4-year-old might not do a great job of making explicit their boundaries.
Yeah.
And so, I need to not assume what their boundaries are, and I need to say I'm not going to force physical contact on them without consent. Right? We teach that to 2- and 3-year-olds. We should also be doing that in every other aspect of our lives. So, specifically around physical touch.
Yep.
And so I think that that's something to lift up too is when you're going through those boundaries, it's don't assume the boundaries of others. Like give them, we're going to
give people opportunity to share, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So we have done our, what do we call them? Cheers and jeers, not our nooks and crannies.
Did you do a devotion?
And then,
yeah,
my turn.
Yeah, it's your turn.
Oh, wow. What a joy that is. I'm so excited. So earth and entitlement for me is kind of revolving around how entitlement leads to stubbornness and often is rooted in like this certainty of like, I know this is mine. I know that I have the right to do this. And, like this certainty and stubbornness are the things that come up for me alongside entitlement. And I'm once again being called towards doubt and humility and not being so rigid in my thinking with entitlement, right? That like, okay, no, this is mine and I deserve this. Like, I need to question that.
Yeah.
I need to question that. And so I want to be like sand rather than like this brick wall.
Right.
I want this where I can hold form and I can hold shape when I'm properly
equipped to do so.
Yeah. And I can, like mud can harden into any form if you shape it, but it requires a little bit of that flexibility from water, right? And so I'm really channeling this idea of what am I going to work on this week? I'm probably going to take a minute and think about like I'm going to set it on my calendar before the next time, before the end of the week. I'm going to say, reflect on the week and what were the moments where you were acted entitled. And then I'm going to ask myself and go through my days and be like, did I do this? And I'm going to set an intentional time to reflect on that for this week.
It's always seems simple or seems redundant or seems like, that's such a taking time and thinking about things. Like that seems like such a
it's so big.
But that's huge.
It's huge.
And it's not little. Taking a couple minutes just to process and say, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
How do I feel about that? Why am I doing this? Do I feel good about those things?
And I'm just going to put 20 minutes on the clock, right? It's going to be one of those things where like
it can be 5.
Like, and it could be 5. Yeah, just check in. But I really want to give myself time to process through the whole week. So I'm going to give myself 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Just to move through and ask that question.
Fantastic. Gratitude.
Love it.
Where are we at?
Is that what?
Yeah.
We're like I like gratitude's pretty cool.
Gratitude's pretty good.
We've determined.
Who are you grateful for character-wise in this show?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the obvious answers for me is Ginger, and just being able to, like, again, as you said, she has consistently said, no, I'm not interested. No, I'm not interested. Here's the line. And doesn't back down, right? I think oftentimes when people are persistent beyond what, like, where you said, we start to be like, it's just easier not to say something. And I love that Ginger continues to say no, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
And Bolin shouldn't have put her in a situation where she had to continue
saying
saying
it. Shouldn't have continued to do it.
Yep. But here we are. What about you?
To bring a little spark of joy, the pyrotechnics stunt,
a little cheer to your gratitude.
The stunt director, like the stunt coordinator for the movie, the amount of joy that he has.
The mover.
Those
are very different things.
Okay. The amount of joy he has for his craft and getting to do that. And like we all know somehow like how setting things on like explosives can be fun.
I love setting things
little fireworks
up to blow up. That sounds fun.
Fireworks are great.
Fireworks are super cool.
But you can see that he has like a little giddy up in the step when he gets asked about the pyrotechnics and gets to talk about it, and he's there for it. And so he's
like, look at this cool thing. I actually can do it with a remote.
I like that joy. I like that amount of joy.
He was into it. Yeah. Liking what you do.
Yeah. That. Well, y'all, it's been another episode of Bending Not Breaking. Thank you so much.
And you stuck with us for the whole year? Some of you, maybe?
Yeah, well, you're here now. And if you haven't listened to us all year, thanks for listening now.
Yeah.
Go follow us on all the social medias, BNB_pod.
Yeah, if you liked the episode, we'd love a review, preferably 5 stars.
But be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, reviews, ratings, sharing this is always a great way to help us out. But thank you so much for listening. I am Sunshine.
And I'm Ben.
And this has been Bending Not Breaking. We'll see you next year.
Next year. Woo.